In the NBA, building a team comes down to a couple of different factors, right? Either you are a destination where you can sign, trade, or build a star, right? Like signing a star typically is very hard, right? Unless you already have kind of a base of a team or you're some huge free agent destination because of location. The other route is drafting your star, developing them, and building a core around them. And the Chicago Bulls are hoping in their next phase they're going to be able to find a star and build correctly around those guys. And while the Chicago Bulls have 10 players on their team that are 25 or younger, we really don't have that building block yet. On today's episode, I'm going to compare the Bulls' young core to other young players around the league. We're going to try to figure out where this team is. We're going to get into all that, plus Stacy King airs his frustration about the Chicago Bulls trade deadline, all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. We still don't have Bulls basketball until Thursday. Now, that may be a benefit for some people. It may be a knock for some that are just waiting to see some Chicago Bulls basketball. And this All-Star weekend didn't really do much about my feelings on basketball. It didn't do much to serve to my need to watch more basketball. But with that said, I want to talk about our Bulls, of course, right? And I want to talk about the Bulls and the young core that we have here, right? And especially when you look at how much this roster's turned over. The Bulls went from one of the older rosters in the league, right? Not at the top 10, but older. Then at the start of the season, we knocked our average age down by 3. After trading Zach LaVine, that average age comes down again. The Bulls actually have 10 players on their team that are 25 and younger. When we look at the most recent top 25 players under 25, only one of the Chicago Bulls players actually landed on that list, and that was Coby White. So I want to start off talking and looking at the young core that we have for the Chicago Bulls, and I want to compare that against some of the other top under 25 or 25 and under players in the league, right? And of course, the one player that we did have on the list of top 25 players under 25 was Coby White, right? And Coby White is a solid enough player, right? The thing and knock on Coby White is his own inconsistency and the fact that he just not has been a consistent threat. He ranked in at 24th on the top 25 list of players 25 and under, and that's a solid enough ranking for him, right? And I think especially when you look at his salary, Coby White, he's had stretches where he's looked really good, and then there's those cold, very big, inconsistent stretches that just really hurt Coby White, right? And I think a player like Coby White, it's easy to fall into looking in through the lens of hey, this is who he could be. Fact of the matter is Coby White's been in the league since 2019, right? And he's an 18-point per game scorer this year after being a 19-point per game scorer last year. But it's always those inconsistencies. And that's one of the things that hurts Coby White the most, right? But under 25, he was on the top 25 under 25 list. Right along with him, you have Ayo Dosunmu, right? He's also 25 years old. Ayo has shown a bunch of flashes. And while I do think that Ayo is one of the most consistent players that we have here, not consistently scoring, consistent with output, right? He's still not a player that you can really build around yet, but he is a player that you can definitely build with. The next player on the list, Josh Giddey, right? I think is fair to go to, 22 years old. And despite some Josh Giddey stands saying that the Bulls should build around him, it's hard to build around him because of yes, he has amazing strengths as being a playmaker. You can't deny as a playmaker, Josh Giddey is one of the best in the league. But unfortunately, with how weak his defense is at times, it makes him unplayable at times, and it's really hard to build around that, right? And it's not hard to build with it, but it's hard to build around it. And he's a free agent at the end of this year. We'll see what the future holds for him. I think after those players, you naturally have Matas Buzelis, a young player who has tons of untapped potential so far, hasn't really played a whole lot of minutes for the Chicago Bulls as of yet. That's starting to come around, and I think he's going to finish the season with a lot more minutes than he started the season with. So, of course, we're going to look at that. The next tier of players, 25 and under, P. Will, Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips. Now, P. Will is a player that has basically started since he came in the league. He's lost his starting position every year but his rookie year. He's an inconsistent player as well. And overall, it's just the lack of aggression, really, from P. Will, the lack of focus. It's like we see the flashes from time to time. Unfortunately, those flashes aren't nearly consistent enough to where you could rely on him. And the team apparently feels the same way as he's no longer a starter. Matas Buzelis is in that starting spot, all right? Dalen and Julian, who the hell knows? That's what I've tried to struggle to come up with a tier for them. And it's really just who the hell knows? Nobody knows what Dalen Terry or Julian Phillips could be. Are they a victim of not playing more minutes? Are they not playing more minutes because they're just not that good, right? And you're going to get people and Bulls fans that are on either side of that coin that look at them and say, they're just not good. And some Bulls fans look and say, they just need to play more. Billy Donovan doesn't play them enough. I think that's fair to look at as well, right? But we just don't know. You look at Jalen Smith. Jalen Smith is another player that the fact that he's still under 25 is wild, right? But I think that while he's a talented player, not a star level talent at all, he's a functional player that I still think could play a little bit more minutes. But, you're not looking at Jalen Smith and thinking, oh, this is some major uncovered gem on your team that's going to change the direction of your team. And then at the end of this, you got THT and Trey Jones. Young vets is the way that I wear these. These guys are vets that have been around it. They have a veterans style game, but you kind of know what they are, right? THT's basically falling out of the rotation because while he started off the season looking decent, THT is a player that can put up a lot of shots in a lot of minutes and get you 10 points. But you got some other players that can do some other things out there. And Trey Jones is a player that I actually like a lot. If you had a Trey Jones coming off your bench as your backup point guard, I think you're in a fine place. But he comes to this team that unfortunately has Lonzo Ball in that spot. We'll see what the future holds there. But then when you compare that, right, to the top 25 list, I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna look at the top 10 in this list, and then we'll skip down and look at some that are around the Bulls. Like the game that I want to play here is how many deep do you get into the top 25, under 25 list until you start thinking that, no, the Bulls actually have players that are comparable to these guys, right? Number one, Wemby. No, the Bulls have nobody that's comparable to Wemby. Not in skill level, not in upside or any of that. Yes, Matas Buzelis has tremendous upside and potential, but it's not Victor Wembanyama's potential. It's just not. Next up, Anthony Edwards. Come on now. Anthony Edwards has face of the league potential. He's taken a whole bunch of threes this year, which has been something that people have knocked him on his game. He's shooting that at a 42% clip, 25.7 points per game. Come on now. No. You're not beating that. Paolo Banchero. Now, I know that some people view Paolo differently, but again, I don't think the Bulls have anybody that's doing anything that can do anything at the level of Paolo. Number 4, Jalen Williams. The fact that Jalen Williams is this high on the list kind of took me off guard, but then you start looking at some of the efficiency numbers that Jalen Williams is having this year. Of course, over 20-point scorer when it comes down to that. Really solid salary as well. He's a mid-range player, but he can create his own shot off the dribble, things like that. So, again, no. LaMelo Ball. Now, while LaMelo is a player that right now is putting up a bunch of numbers, but he hasn't really learned how to win yet, I still don't think you have anybody that's on the excitement level of LaMelo Ball on this Bulls team. Next up, Franz Wagner. Number 6 on this list. Now, this is, in 2 or 3 years, it's going to be interesting to see for the people who compare Matas Buzelis to Franz Wagner. It's going to be interesting to see how that's viewed here in a few years. But as of right now, no, nobody's playing at the level that Franz has shown himself to be at. Tyrese Halliburton. Now, the thing with Tyrese is the numbers very similar to Coby White's, 8.4 points per game, 3.7 rebounds, but 8.9 assists. He's doing that in 44% shooting. He's also averaging 1.2 steals per game. This is a guy that, still with Tyrese, sometimes it just feels like he doesn't understand how good he can be. He doesn't take it over, but he's a wildly inconsistent player as well. I can see Bulls fans starting to make the case, all right, are we starting to get, if Coby was consistent, how will we look at him compared to Tyrese Halliburton? But he's still not consistent, right? Evan Mobley, sorry, no. We don't have anybody at the level of Evan Mobley on both sides of the ball. Cade Cunningham at number 9. And then you get into Darius Garland at number 10, right? Tyrese Maxey at number 11. And while, Coby White came in second to him in Most Improved Player of the Year category, I think this season Tyrese Maxey has shown why he's a better and more consistent and a better leader than Coby White right now as well. We'll see what happens with that over time. Number 12, Alperen Sengun. And Come on. I love Goon, but no. Chet, 13th. I think Chet's a little bit too low on this list. But then you start getting into the place where, all right, you got Scotty Barnes at number 14. I know he's averaging over 20 points per game. Scotty Barnes is still a hugely inconsistent player. Zion at number 15. Like when he's on the court and healthy, yeah, nobody's matched, but how often is he healthy? Number 16, Jalen Johnson, right? Number 17, Tyler Hero. Number 18, Jalen Green. Number 19, Cam Thomas. Number 20, Brandon Miller. So, and then number 21, RJ Barrett. Now, the reason why I want to bring up this list, right, is that when you look at what these guys have shown that are on this list so far, right, and what they have shown or what they've been given or whatever else it is, like Scotty Barnes is a player that the Toronto Raptors said last year that they wanted to build, they were going to start building around. They quickly kind of have now pivoted away from that. We even heard that he may have been available at the trade deadline. Jalen Green is a hugely inconsistent player, but his highs are so high, right? And he's not as inconsistent as like a Coby White, but he's still an inconsistent player. So you have to start looking at, all right, so what is stopping this Bulls young core from being at the level of those guys, right? I think you look at Josh Giddey, like I said, how close is it? The way that you tend to look at young talent is you want them to be elite at something, whether it's leadership, whether it's defense, whether it's scoring, whether it's two-way play, right? Whether it's their ability to be efficient while having the offense built around them. How many of the young players that are on this Bulls team, we just talked about 10 players under 25 are close to being that. Josh Giddey with this playmaking is close to having a skill that you can build something around. But like I said, his defensive liabilities hurt him. And his shooting liabilities at time hurt him to where you cannot responsibly build a team around Josh Giddey. You just can't. You can't build a whole team and say everything that we're going to do should be built around Josh Giddey, mainly because of his inconsistencies. And maybe because of his mainly because of his defensive limitations. You have to take him out of the court sometimes in close defensive games, and it increases your chance to win. Now, what Josh Giddey does have, he's an elite playmaker in the 90th percentile as far as playmakers in the NBA generating shots. You can build with that. You can make that part of what you do in your presence offensively, but you can't build a whole team around that. And before my Josh Giddey stands start trying to quote per 36 to try to make an excuse of why he's as good as somebody like Cade Cunningham or anything like that, or say, well, if he just got more shots, like the player is who he is. And Josh Giddey is a really good player, right? And especially even better in certain situations. But if you think you can build a team around just Josh Giddey, you're smoking something, right? Coby White scoring, very inconsistent. You can't build a team around that. Ayo Dosunmu in this two-way play, you can't build a team around what Ayo Dosunmu is, yet he's the type of player that is your Swiss Army knife that can definitely help your system and your scheme go, that at times is going to make it look really, really good, that's going to save your bacon more times than not. That Ayo Dosunmu is that level of player, right? And I think as a starter, especially with the fact that even if his shot's not falling, he's bringing something consistently on the defensive side of the ball, so he can still be productive for you, but you cannot build a team around that if your goal is being in the playoffs. He hasn't shown that yet, right? And so the Bulls don't have that young guy that you can really build around yet, and you can say to yourself, by building around this guy, we are going to be a playoff team. When you look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, they have a guy on the under 20, two guys on the under 25 list that you can do that. And of course, a veteran in Donovan Mitchell help, right? But I think even if you take Donovan Mitchell off that team and you have Darius Garland and Evan Mobley, they're still a playoff team for sure. They're not going to be the number one team in the East, but they're still a playoff team. The Boston Celtics, they're older than that, but they drafted those two players. The New York Knicks, they're one of those teams that were able to put a team together because of them, a mixture of them making the right moves for a while. But then they were able to take those moves and trade those players to get better players back, right? Or those assets and get other players back in Towns. And they signed Jalen Brunson. They went and got him Mikal Bridges, right? And things like that. But okay, cool, right? You got the Indiana Pacers. They traded for Tyrese Halliburton, right? But they drafted players like Ben Mather and things like that. Not on the other 25 list, but again, they have one of those guys in Tyrese Halliburton. You can build your offense around Tyrese Halliburton. Now you're going to start off slow if he gets off to a slow start like at the start of the season, but they've worked themselves back up to number 4 seed. The Milwaukee Bucks drafted Giannis, right? They drafted Giannis. The Detroit Pistons, they got Cade, they got Asur Thompson down there, they got Jaden Ivey down there. The Orlando Magic, Franz and Paolo. Atlanta Hawks, Jalen Johnson, Dyson Daniels, Risha Sher, Trae Young, even though he's not under 25. The Miami Heat, they got Tyler Hero, but they're still that's a culture team, right? They've pieced that team together. They got Bam there as well. So you're not really like the OKC Thunder, all young draft picks. The Memphis Grizzlies, John Morant, right? The Denver Nuggets, like they drafted Jokic, right? So they paired him with Jamal Murray, brought in Aaron Gordon, drafted Michael Porter Jr., right? So you got guys there. You have to have a young core of guys that you can build with. You have to have that young player or go out and sign that player to build around. The Bulls are not a free agent destination. They've never been a free agent destination. Now, unless AK and Eversley somehow pull a rabbit out of their hat and sign somebody that none of us are expecting that's going to change the trajectory of this team, you got to get to building. You got to get to drafting well, and that's where this team, even in having the young players under 25 that we have, that's where they've missed. No matter how you view the players that we've drafted so far, Io's promising, right? No matter how you look at Dalen, they haven't gotten that guy yet. That's what this next phase is about, right? For my Bulls fans like Brian Washington, who was calling in, shout out to Brian Washington, or Todd understands it, you got to have a young piece that you can build around, that attracts free agents, that then makes it easier for you to build for you to figure out the pieces to go around that player, right? That's this phase that the Bulls are in, is finding that young player under 25 that you can build around. Is that going to be Matas? Maybe, right? But in the case of that, until Matas shows that, try to find another one of those guys, because if you can get two of them, a la Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, that's where it sits your franchise in a much better place where we're way more objective. I asked over the weekend, how far are the Bulls away from competing for a top 6 seed? And Bulls fans, of course, like 3 to 5 years was like the mean average there. Because, yeah, if things go right, if this team actually drafts well, we could be right there. But then again, betting on this front office to draft well, that's a whole nother question and concern for many Bulls fans that we got to try to make it through that part as well. So we'll see what the future holds, man. Overall, we'll see what it has. And I just wanted to talk about that, bring that aspect and thought process on it. You guys can let me know how you feel down below. But before we go, I do want to talk about Stacy King on his recent episode of Give Me the Hot Sauce. Actually, Stacy King is a guy that sometimes walks the company line, toes the company line, but then you get these episodes from Stacy where he's just real honest about, and not to say I think he's always honest about his feelings, but he's a guy that he's a company man, right? But he said this: there's some kind of collusion going on outside with people who don't want to deal with the Bulls for whatever reason. I don't know this for sure, but I feel like they just know that the Bulls are desperate to move certain players. I think a lot of teams saw their hand and said, okay, let's just offer them nothing. He goes on to say this later on. If DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and Caruso were on a different team, I believe they would have garnered first-round picks. I just think teams don't want to deal with the Bulls. They don't want to work with the Bulls for whatever reason. And that gets back to what a lot of you guys have called on and talked about. The Chicago Bulls front office and the way that they have dealt and handled their assets over years, teams feel like they can wait the Bulls out and that the Bulls are eventually going to make a dumbass decision, right? That is just what teams believe around the league. I fully believe that. I don't know if collusion is the word there, right? I don't know if all the front offices are conspiring together to say, hey, let's all say no to the Bulls, but I do think smart GMs have watched and surveyed what the Bulls have done and how they've hurt the trade value. For my Bulls fans, even that, I was in a conversation on Twitter, I refuse to call it X, the other day with a Bulls fan is just like, yeah, I think the Bulls are going to move Coby because they have to for this. And it really came down to incompetency from the Bulls front office and the lack of trust for them to get it done right? And so I do think teams are waiting out the Bulls. I do think there's a little bit of that. Now, I also think that AK not being aggressive enough plays a part into it, but it goes back to you cannot be a dumbass for years and then expect people to treat you with some respect. AK got to get back to earning the respect around the league by making smart moves. Almost every trade that AK's made has come back to bite him in his ass, signing trades and everything as well, right? Because of not recognizing the value or knowing how to move off players at the right time. That is something that has ailed and hurt this team for far too long, and it's going to continue until they start making smart moves. Now, was it a smart move to not take any deals for Vooch at this year's trade deadline? That would only be told once Vooch is moved, if he's moved, and what the Bulls eventually get back for him, right? And, overall, my Bulls fans that say we got to move Coby. All right, Kobe's value has been hurt because now you've had him playing in a backcourt with a point guard and Josh Giddey that their skill set really doesn't fit the most seamless together. They've had times of working it out a little bit, but there's still some things there that are hugely questionable, right? So overall, like, I agree a lot with what Stacy laid out and said here. There are teams that are waiting out the Bulls, and they think that, hey, we can just offer them nothing. They'll eventually have to come back to the table because they're desperate. You have to remove desperation and replace desperation with determination, with focus, with drive, right? With responsibility to how and what you're moving around this league. And AK got to make that aware. This is AK's time now to show, can you get back not only in the good graces of your Bulls fans, but can you get back in the graces of looking like a competent GM that other GMs have to take seriously? And that's the answer that we don't have yet. And we'll see. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullsCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.